Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, an inside look at the making of CBN Films' latest release, Oracles of God, the New Testament. A look at the tenacious Israeli team that persevered to make this documentary about the origins of the New Testament. We'll hear from writer-director Erin Zimmerman about the film. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Today we're taking a look at CBN Films' new documentary, Oracles of God, the New Testament. It addresses the question people have asked for 2,000 years. Can the New Testament be trusted? Does it tell the truth about Jesus' life and the early church? We'll speak with the film's writer and director, Erin Zimmerman, throughout the program and take a look at some clips. But first, here's the latest from our news desk.
Israeli police escorted Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife Usha to the Old City for a tour of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the site where many believe Jesus was crucified. Israeli government spokesperson Shosh Bedrosian said Vance's visit and meetings with Israeli leaders made a strong impression.
Prime Minister Netanyahu said he was impressed with the vice president's clarity, sharpness, solidarity for our common cause, and sincere friendship that he saw in conference and private meetings that took place today.
One sticking point is allowing any troops from Turkey to take part in a peacekeeping force in Gaza. Turkey's President Erdogan strongly supports the Muslim Brotherhood, the same group that spawned Hamas. When asked about Turkey's involvement, Netanyahu said,
"So I have very strong opinions about that. You want to guess what they are?"
Vance gave Netanyahu room to disagree.
We don't want a vassal state, and that's not what Israel is. We don't want a client state, and that's not what Israel is. We want a partnership. We want an ally here.
U.S.-Israel analyst Eli Piepsh told CBN News that Israel will take action if its national security is threatened in Gaza by Qatar or Turkey.
This is going to be the opportunity where if Qatar and Turkey are going to be acting and are going to be trying to rehabilitate, are going to protect Hamas instead of disarming Hamas, Israel is going to be very, very quick to act. If Israel acted in Doha a few weeks ago, Israel can act in Gaza even if there are Qatari or Turkish elements.
Piepsh says Turkey and Qatar value their relations with the U.S. over their relations with Hamas.
And that, I think, is a fundamental feature of this agreement. And if there's going to be friction between those countries and Israel, it will also mean there'll be friction between those countries and the U.S., and I don't think Turkey and Qatar want to have friction with the U.S.
Wednesday, Israel's parliament advanced a bill extending Israeli sovereignty over its communities in biblical Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. While the vote appeared to be a political maneuver aimed at the Netanyahu government, Rubio said such a move could endanger the peace process.
That's a vote in the Knesset, but obviously I think the president's made clear that's not something we'd be supportive of right now, and we think is even threatening to the peace deal.
Meanwhile, the funeral of returned hostage Tal Haimi took place in his home of Kibbutz Nir Yitzhak, which he died defending on October 7th. And Thai hostage Sonthaya Okarasri was honored prior to sending his body home for burial. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Secretary of State Marco Rubio shortly after his arrival. His visit comes on the heels of Vice President J.D. Vance and negotiators Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. President Trump visited last week.
This is a circle of trust and partnership. You've been an extraordinary friend of Israel, and now we face days of destiny. We want to advance peace. We still have security challenges, but I think that we can work together, and by working together, both address the challenges and seize the opportunities.
Rubio noted that it's just over a week since President Trump's work led to the release of 20 living hostages and a ceasefire, the first phase in a multi-step and complicated peace plan. Hamas also agreed to the return of 28 dead hostages, but 13 are still unaccounted for, leading to charges they violated the deal.
No one's under any illusions. We've already done the impossible once, and we intend to keep doing that. If we can, we have good partners that we're working on. But we feel confident and positive about the progress that's being made. We're clear-eyed about the challenges, too.
A small number of Knesset members put a strain on the U.S.-Israel relationship when they passed the first reading of a bill to extend Israeli sovereignty over biblical Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. When asked if he thought the sovereignty vote would affect the peace plan, Trump said,
"They're not going to do anything with the West Bank. Don't worry about it. Israel's doing very well. They're not going to do anything with it."
He also told Time magazine that Israel would lose U.S. support if that happened. The Prime Minister's office said the vote was a deliberate political provocation by the opposition to sow discord during Vice President J.D. Vance's visit to Israel. Tech columnist and Israel advocate Hillel Fold tells CBN News he sees the vote as part of a global political trend to tear down political leaders.
And so the opposition said, "Oh, here's a good way to give it to Bibi. We're going to vote for, sovereignty in Judea and Samaria and just annoy the vice president," which they did, and it worked because he said he was offended, which is a very strange statement to make.
Regarding Trump's statements, Fold says he believes Trump is a real friend to Israel, but that could change.
If Netanyahu makes one wrong move or even says one wrong word, I have a feeling that friendship, that love affair is going to come to an end. And unfortunately right now, whether it's a right move or a wrong move to take sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, I think it's a little bit absurd, for lack of a better term, that the United States of America thinks it has the right to dictate to Israel a decision that's internal to Israel, let alone a security issue.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
CBN Films' new documentary, Oracles of God, the New Testament, sets out to present evidence of what's been called the greatest story ever told. The production began 2 years ago against the backdrop of war, with actors leaving for the battlefront and missiles interrupting filming in the Galilee. Here's an inside look at how the team completed the film, despite the challenges, and found joy in the making of it. Through sirens and schedule changes, scripture turned into script.
It was an enormous privilege to have an entirely Jewish cast and crew. And at one point they looked at each other and they said, "Why don't we ever hear these stories in school? These are amazing."
I feel like telling more and more spiritual stories like this story, and to give more light in these very dark times, it's a huge privilege.
Before you're crucified.
Okay.
And you know that, but they don't.
There was this moment of, really, in the end, we're acting, but of lashings and blood and the crown, and suddenly I thought about the crucifixion, I thought about Jesus.
Stand by!
Father! I thought about the crucifixion itself, and that moment when Jesus is crucified is simply something that is etched. I think there's no person in the world for whom that image isn't etched in their mind.
Time, set, action!
I've been working with the same crew for about 8 years, I would say, and there was such joy and unity on this set. We enjoyed every second.
7th of October. Almost all of us lost the joy. I personally lost my joy. I lost it completely. And I don't know why this production gave me back the joy.
We got a close-up of him putting his hand, and we'll put the fake nail.
I'm going to do wounds and cuts and beating, and suddenly in this production, it became art again.
Even though war caused issues, it couldn't stop God's timing. Spiritual hunger has led to resurgence in the Bible, especially among the young. Erin's been watching the numbers. You were citing actually some statistics from back in 2024 where Bible reading is actually exploding. Tell us why this film kind of hits this the growing hunger for knowing about what's in the Bible.
Both in the US and the UK, millennials and Gen Z are really leading the way in Bible reading and going back to church. But even last year, 2024, there was a 22% increase in Bible sales over 2023, which is really interesting because for the rest of books, it was only a 1% increase.
Oracles satisfies the hunger from the place where it all began.
That CBN decided to film the film in Israel, in Jerusalem, in the Sea of Galilee, in the authentic locations, Mount of the Beatitude, deserts. It gives the film a special look and it's very authentic. It's very encouraging that especially in very, very difficult times, we have an American network that dares to come to Israel and to film and trust us that in any time, come rain or shine, we will deliver and make this film. So as an Israeli, that's for me very important.
Coming up, filming in between missile strikes, God's faithfulness in helping oracles of God cross the finish line. Erin Zimmerman, thanks for joining us. You're the writer and director of Oracles of God, the New Testament. This is a project that started way back in 2017. Tell us how it made it all the way here to 2025.
Hi, Chris. It's good to be with you. I don't think I've ever had a project drag on this long, but we've just been hit by a multitude of world events. The first one being the pandemic, when everyone shut down, so we couldn't go anywhere. Israel wasn't accepting visitors and we couldn't fly. And then we did get there 2021. We shot the first film about the Old Testament. And then in 2023, we were all set to go with the New Testament, stayed the whole summer, did all the pre-production, and we were set to start filming on October 9th of 2023. As we all know now, 2 days before that came October 7th, and it just horrific attack by Hamas on Israel. So we had to shelve the project again. We came back last year in 2024 to do it, and wouldn't you know, Hezbollah felt like coming down and saying hello when we were filming in the Galilee. So it's been some fun times with this project.
What were the challenges of actually filming during a war? I can imagine there's a lot of complications, including some of your cast members actually being part of the IDF.
The great majority of our cast, being a biblical film, was young males. So a great majority of them immediately went to the reserves. We had some people going to the reserves in between our shoots. We had to schedule their scenes in between their service time. And for a movie that has a lot of Jesus and the apostles, of course we wanted to shoot in the Sea of Galilee. And of course the week we wanted to shoot is when Hamas started throwing every kind of missile at the Sea of Galilee. At 5 a.m. on our first day of filming, we were set to go out to Mount Arbel and shoot this beautiful scene with Jesus doing, the Sermon on the Mount and the Lord's Prayer with his apostles. So 4 a.m. And it was unusual because, as you know, because you live there, you hear the sirens first and then you hear sort of the bombs falling or whatever, or the Iron Dome going off. That morning was different. We heard the bombing first. I was woken up anyway by this just tremendous bombing, and then the sirens sort of kicked in. So it was kind of a fun morning run for us all to the shelter. And then we just got up and thought, okay, it's done. Let's go out. The sun's shining. It's a beautiful day. We had the most beautiful sky ever. And so we went out to Mount Arbel and filmed. The next day after we filmed, Mount Arbel was closed. We went to the Sea of Galilee and filmed. The next day after that, the Sea of Galilee was closed. We tried to go to Nazareth. And then on the way to Nazareth, somebody called us and said, no, shrapnel's falling in Nazareth. You can't go there. So we had to reroute our plans a little bit, and I just gave credit to God and our producers for being able to do that so deftly. We didn't miss a location. We didn't miss a shoot. We got it all done.
Wow, remarkable. And we want to talk about that. And we also want to talk about, how this film is coming out at a critical time when there's really a growing spiritual awareness and people looking more to the Bible. So we'll talk about that in our next segment. Still ahead, a generation hungry for God, turning to the Bible in record numbers.
Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. We were eyewitnesses of His Majesty.
The Gospels in the 2nd century were called the Apostolic Memoirs.
There was urgency. We need to get these traditions down before we lose the eyewitness accounts.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God.
Christianity did not begin in a lie, and we can and we must demonstrate this.
I said full. Next. I said next.
Matthew, son of Alphaeus.
Who are you?
Follow me. Come.
Welcome back, Erin Zimmerman. You know, there seems to be a growing awareness, and you were citing actually some statistics from back in 2024 where Bible reading is actually exploding. Tell us why this film kind of hits this the growing hunger for knowing about what's in the Bible.
You know, sometimes we really question God's timing and things. You know, as I said earlier, I started this project in 2017. I thought we'd be done by 2019. But God has his plan, and he knew that right now there was going to be this resurgence of hunger in the Bible, especially with young people. That's the really shocking thing. Both in the US and the UK, millennials and Gen Z are really leading the way in Bible reading and going back to church. But even last year, 2024, there was a 22% increase in Bible sales over 2023, which is really interesting because for the rest of books, it was only a 1% increase. You know, people in the publishing industry are wringing their hands. Oh my goodness, publishing is dead, but yet the Bible's increasing 22%. This year, 2025, we already have 1 million more Bible sales at this time than we did last year at this time. So it's continuing, and we see it. And I think it really started with the pandemic. I think the pandemic caused a lot of anxiety and fear in young people, and, you know, having to not go to school. They just weren't used to anything like that. And there's a lot of anxiety, and there's a lot of looking for hope. And, you know, it just doesn't seem like the whole world's on fire, and you're really in the center of it right now. But there's so much violence in America. There's so much war everywhere else, Russia, the Middle East, everywhere. And I think people are really looking for some hope and looking for Jesus and looking for what can calm me down in this time. And they're going to the Bible. And I think it was natural because they've been, honestly, young people have been kept from the Bible for so long by their schools, by society. It's going to circle back around. They'll eventually rebel and find, you know, things are so attractive when they're forbidden. If you forbid the Bible, they're going to get there.
Like that. That's perfect.
Okay. So as the writer-director, in what way did you want to sort of literally bring the Bible to life?
We have this tremendous gift with the New Testament that we didn't have in our Old Testament movie. And this gift is called the Church Fathers, this generation of Christians that was one or maybe two generations removed from the apostles. Some of them were even actually direct students of the apostles. So they heard all of these stories firsthand. So I went back to the source. I went to these church fathers and heard what they said about how they were written. And I learned some really funny things, including this was a funny thing to me, but you'll have to watch the movie to see it. Why John wrote his gospel. You have to remember, John's gospel was written around AD 90, about 30 years after the rest of the apostles. So he read the first three gospels and decided he had to write his own. So we explain why. And for me, it was kind of funny.
And we're going to talk more about the making of Oracles of God, the New Testament, when we come back. When we come back, final thoughts from Oracles of God writer-director Erin Zimmerman. Erin, tell us what you want viewers to take away when they go and see the movie.
Well, we see a lot of stories about Jesus and a lot of movies and television programs, and they're amazing. And I think they've really resurrected an interest in Jesus and in the apostles and what his life was like on earth. So we're doing something that's a very complimentary story. How did we get those stories, and were they written down correctly? There's been a move for a couple hundred years now to sort of discredit the Bible and say, well, it wasn't written at the time. It was written a few hundred years later, and it couldn't have been written by eyewitnesses, and, you know, all that nonsense. So we go back to the church fathers again, these people who learned at the feet of some of the apostles, heard all the stories, and we're going to show you how those stories were written down. What sources? Think about it. Would you remember something so clearly that you'd seen 20 or 30 years ago? When these apostles were writing, they were writing about 20, 30 years after the time of Jesus. What were their sources? There were sources that are not actually in the Bible. So we look at that. We look at how and when they wrote things down. We look at why they wrote things down. So I feel like this is everything that Jesus wanted us to know when he left. You know, we didn't have the privilege of walking with him in the Galilee. We didn't have the privilege of being in the Old Testament and hearing the audible voice of God booming down at us. What we have is the Holy Spirit, and we have this Bible, this final love letter. So to me, it's the most important piece of writing that can be in our lives. Why do we not want to know how it was written and by whom and where? I want to know everything about this book that was Jesus' final gift to us. So that's what I want people to walk away with, just how the whole process came about and how the Holy Spirit really guided this process to make sure that the words that were written down 2,000 years ago are the words we have today in our Bible, in our iPad, however we read it.
Well, what a great takeaway. Great. We look forward to it, Erin. Thanks for joining us. Well, that's all for this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline about Oracles of God, the New Testament. Thanks for joining us. And as always, keep praying for Israel and for the peace of Jerusalem. I'm Chris Mitchell. For all of us here at the Jerusalem Bureau, we'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.